presento una lectura corta, sencilla. Es un librito para niños, escrito por Jen Darling, que se titula How Perky Came to Perk's Fun Fair. Como Perky llegó a la feria de diversión de Perks. Perks es el nombre del pueblo y el protagonista se va a llamar Perky, en honor del pueblo Perks. Far and away, in the back of beyond, there is a lake. In the middle of the lake, there is an island on which there is a hill. On the top of the hill, there is a tree called the brown broom tree. Every 500 years, a bud appears on its longest branch, and at the proper time, this bud opens, and there for all to see is a perfect baby Perconian bear, who, from that moment, is fed honey twice every day by local honeybees. Now, because Perconian bears are delicate, while still on the branch, all the winds keep away from the island where the brown broom tree grows. But one day, the east wind's youngest breeze, who was a very bold little breeze indeed, blew right across the lake and grabbed the tiny bear off the tree and carried him away with a whoosh. On and on, the breeze blew over land and sea, and as the breeze blew, the little bear cried great tears, because he was so frightened at being snatched away from the brown broom tree. On and on, the breeze blew until the sun hung low in the sky, and his mammy, the east wind, called him home for his tea. As he was very hungry from washing all day, he set the bear in some soft grass and blew away. Now, it just happened the grass was in the square not far from where you live. But even if you were there, at the very time the little bear was set down, you would never have seen him, because he was so small. However, if your ears were very sharp, you might have heard him cry, hug me, which are the first words a baby Perconian bear says. This is why they are always called huggy bears. And so the little huggy bear ran this way and that way, crying, hug me, to one and another of the people hurrying past on the way home, but nobody stopped it, because nobody heard his little voice. So, after a while, tired and hungry, the baby bear crept under a daisy on the grass and cried himself to sleep. When he awoke the next morning, he decided the only thing to do was go home. So, being a brave little bear, he stood as tall as he could and set off to find the way back to the tree on top of the hill in the middle of the lake at the back of beyond. But the way was long, and the way was hard, and soon the hungry huggy bear knew he was lost. Then, when his feet were so sore he could walk no further, a passing bee saw him, and this bee was so surprised he sat down on a flower and rubbed his eyes and looked again. Twice more he rubbed his eyes and looked, and then the bee heard the little bear say, hug me, and he knew he was looking at the very rarest of all creatures, a Perconian bear. All his life, the bee had heard stories about huggy bears, but he always thought they were just fairy tales. And now, when he saw one with his very own eyes, he was so excited he flew off, shouting at the top of his voice, "Buzz! I saw a huggy bear here in Ireland." He buzzed all the way home to his hive and right into his mother's throne room. As soon as she heard about the little bear, Queen Mivy, the queeniest queen of all the queen bees, followed her son to the place where the tiny bear stood holding out his little arms, saying, hug me, over and over again. Buzz! We must do something about this immediately. Queen Mivy buzzed, and as soon as she buzzed, 300 of her children came and led the little bear to the village of beehives in the meadow nearby. Here they fed him as much honey as he could eat and put him to bed in the middle of a fluffy yellow dandelion. Then, when he was fast asleep, Queen Mivy called a meeting of all the queen bees, and at this meeting it was decided that there was no way that the huggy bear could get back to the island. It was too far, and no one knew the way. A home would have to be found for him right away, because the tiny bear would soon be too big to sleep in a fluffy yellow dandelion. But as this is so, each one of us will have to send our best scouts out to find a proper home for this baby bear where he will be hugged and loved until he grows into a fine big bear. Queen Mivy buzzed, and all the other queens nodded their heads. Yes, and so it was. The scouts flew north, south, east, and west, and day after day they came home sadly shaking their heads. Buzz, I found no place at all, they each said as they fell into their little beds, too tired even to eat. Then, one day, a bee flew right into Queen Mivy's throne room without knocking. Buzz, I found where he belongs, he said, and he went on to tell her about the sign that read, Perks Fun Fair. Buzz, that sounds just the place for a Perconian beer. Congratulations. The queen bee said, we must leave immediately. There is not a minute to lose, she said, and so saying, her children gathered up the little bear. Flying close together so that the little bear could sit on their backs, the bees flew after the scout. And so it was they airlifted him to Perk's Fun Fair and set him down on the top step of a long caravan. Then its bee gave the little bear a sip of honey, kissed him goodbye, and wished him well, and the rest is history. Sal, the nice lady who runs the fair, found the little bear, and every time he said, hug me, dozens of children hugged him. And everybody loved him so much, the huggy bear grew bigger and bigger until he was the biggest huggy bear who ever lived in all the world. Not only that, he was so friendly and playful, Sal decided he should be called Perkie, and from that day to this, Perkie Bear has been the happiest huggy bear in all Ireland.